Hi, everybody. I'm Bruce Patton. I'm the curator here at Savoy Automobile Museum. Welcome. We've got a great event tonight, this program, talking about the Indy 500 and winners through the decades. We're going to go through not only a little bit about the cars, but about the Indianapolis 500, Paul Page, and we have Jason here from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum, and then our moderator, Ken Gross. Before we get into it, though, I'd like to remind you that our current exhibits that are on display. So we have the prominent Packards, so that's only going to be here for another couple of weeks. So make sure you go and get to see that. Obviously, we have the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum cars there down the Great Hall. We just put in the supercars, so hopefully you guys are enjoying those. We just got those put in. And we have our survivors. And what I'd like to tell you about next is in December, our Packards will go out, and we have what's called a Quiet Greatness, so the Japanese collectible cars. So I don't know if anybody here is into the Japanese collectible cars, but we have the two authors of the book called A Quiet Greatness, and they brought in some very unique Japanese cars, so it'll be exciting when those get in. And yes, we actually have been working on for 2025. These are our exhibits. They'll be up on the website so you guys can see what's coming in 2025. But you can kind of take a little sneak peek because you guys are here. You can see what's coming for 2025. Also wanted to mention that we just had the Need for Speed. I think that was just last night. So a fun movie. And the next one we have coming up is the Muppet. Is it the Muppets? Yeah, the Muppet movie. So come back for that. That'll be a fun movie. Especially bring the kids for that one. Yeah, December 1st. Thanks. And for 2025, we also have the movies already, so you can go on the website and see what we have for 2025 and the schedule for the movies we have coming in 2025. And we'd like to thank Styles Auto Care for our Tireside chats. Their sponsorship helps us do these programs that you guys can come and see. So thank you very much, Styles. We appreciate it. And now, I know you're not here to hear me, so let me introduce Ken Gross. Ken is our guest curator for most of our exhibits that we do, and he'll be our moderator tonight. Many of you know Ken. He's really kind of part of the actual, our family here, and so we really appreciate his assistance. If you don't know Ken, he's written 25 automotive books, probably working on another one or two already. He's been chief judge and is chief judge at Pebble Beach. He's also a part of the Automotive Hall of Fame, and also the International Motor Press Association got the Ken Purdy Award. So without further ado, I'm going to let Ken go ahead and introduce our other two speakers today.
Well, good evening, everyone. And I have to thank you all first for not watching the Georgia-Tennessee football game. We can't promise regular updates, but seriously, we appreciate your coming tonight. And I'm delighted to have two friends, Jason Vansickle, who's the Vice President of Curatorial Operations at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum. And let me ask a quick question before I finish Jason's introduction. How many of you have been to the Indy 500, to the race? There we go. Great, okay. And how many of you have been to the museum? We are among friends. Jason, despite his youthfulness, has a major position at the Indy Museum, and they are undergoing a major, really they're building an all-new museum, and he'll tell us a little about that as part of our program tonight. He also is extraordinarily generous in terms of lending cars, whether it's Pebble Beach or here. As you see, we've got a wonderful parade of former winners, the second group of cars we've had from the Indy Museum, so we're very, very appreciative. And Paul Page, I like to say, I've listened to for decades before I
Wait a
actually
minute.
met him. And I mean,
A couple of years.
Paul succeeded Sid Collins as the voice of the 500, and he is a broadcaster par excellence. He hasn't just done cars. I mean, he's done everything from sumo wrestling to you name it. But he's profoundly knowledgeable about the Indy 500. And he joined the Indy Hall of Fame in 2022, and I urge you, if you now that I know that you've all been to the race, if you don't have Paul's book, it is really fabulous. A lot of insider gen about the greatest race on the planet, and the title is, you know the title because you've probably heard his broadcast. Hello, I'm Paul Page. It's race day in Indianapolis. So if you don't have one of these, get it, because it's really terrific. So without further ado, let me ask our two guests. The Indy 500 began, actually, you know, before I do that, I'm forgetting one of the things I'm supposed to do, and I think Bruce has the clicker. For those of you who didn't have a good chance to see the cars that we have out there, I'm going to run through them, and then if time permits, at the end, we'll talk about them in a little more detail. But
You can see it down here.
we have the Marmon Wasp is not here. It will be here, which is another reason for you Indy fans to come back in a week or so to see it. It's the first Indy winner. And we've really got some great cars. This is the second Indy winner, the National. This is the famous car that Jimmy Murphy drove at the French Grand Prix. So in essence, a Formula One winning car in 1921, I believe it was. I particularly like this because anything with Harry Miller's name on it is all for me. We're just going to whip quickly through here. This was the Joel Thorne, Art Sparks car. Joel Thorne, when asked what his greatest thrill was at Indianapolis, he mentioned some woman's name. So it showed you how serious he was about racing. This is an Emil Diet, fabulous automobile. We've got a Curtis, of course. We have a Watson, of course. Johnny Lightning, and we'll talk about these. I just wanted you to know that every one of these cars is an Indy winner. So it's kind of unique to have it. I wanted to start us off a little bit with one question and then get to the famous Sid Collins. So my question for our two guests really is, the Indy 500, as you all know, began in 1911 with the Marmon Wasp. Most people don't know of a lot of IndyCar races, perhaps. They can't name drivers. But everybody knows that on Memorial Day, you watch or you listen to or somehow you absorb the Indy 500. So why is that? How has one race managed to dominate racing the way it has? Maybe Jason would take a crack at that.
Well, I think through the magic of radio, when radio was your only outlet, and when I first took over that in 1977, it astonished me at how many handwritten letters you would get telling me mostly where they were on race day. I'm with my family. There are 12 of us. We go to our grandfather's house and we wash the car while we're listening to the Indy 500. I had a letter once from a priest who was actually in hiding in the Congo, but he had a shortwave radio, and we broadcast in those days on the American Forces radio network, and so he was listening. So I think that there is a magic about it that was started with radio and started with Sid Collins, who you see there on the left. And because of that magic, it draws people there. And then I think all of you know, if you've been there once, you are going back, right?
No, I think it's pure Americana at its core. Obviously, when you look at what Carl Fisher did in 1909 to build the track, and then a few years later with the implementation of the Indianapolis 500, to Paul's point, it's tradition, it's family, it's competition, it's testing barriers, it's man or women versus machine. Being somewhat younger and growing up with the 500 in the last 30 years, I think Paul, at least in my generation, Paul did it well throughout his career with the Delta Force intros, and how he could encapsulate what the 500 meant and what you were about to see in history unfolding in front of your eyes that he documented, whether it be on the radio or TV, just adds to that legacy. But then you look back at, Sid Collins and all these voices throughout there, that added to what the mystique of the 500 was.
Paul, maybe you'd talk a little bit about Sid and how he began this tradition and kind of what his instructions were to help you guys bring it alive.
Well, the Indy 500 had been broadcast on the mutual networks, and they only broadcast for, I think it was as few as 15 minutes every so often. And Sid reasoned that was not enough for Indianapolis. He was a salesman and a sports director at Indianapolis radio station, WIBC, and he wanted more. So he went to Mr. Holman, who owned the racetrack, and convinced him that 500-mile race would be fine back in 1952. Mr. Holman actually wasn't really excited about it because he could not imagine how you could keep an audience through 500 miles of racing. But Sid really pulled off a broadcasting miracle. He got all of the local radio stations together, got announcers from them, more importantly, in fact, engineers from them, to be able to put together this vast network. And of course, it got as big as 1,300 domestic stations at one point. And you didn't have satellites in those days, so every station had to be hooked up by AT&T long lines directly. So you call an order in, and actually next to our radio network office underneath the old Tower Terrace, AT&T was right next door, and we'd get a call and jump up and run in there. But then Sid created the technique. You're actually covering a major news event, less than a sporting event, but he figured out how to mold in all of the announcers and taught us how to, with voice inflection, move to one another, and the importance of the descriptions of the cars, to make them in the theater of the mind bright and presence, and even try to give you a sense of, it's a light wind, and you can hear you can feel the whiff of the breeze that carries the then methanol engines up to you. He created all of that concept, and he loved the Indy 500, and he proved Mr. Holman wrong.
I think, too, television in its earliest days was black and white.
Right.
And the announcers, yourself included, they talked about the colors of the cars. Mm-hmm. So as you listened, and I was a devotee like so many people probably in our audience, it was as though they were in the four corners of the track, which they were, and they were describing the cars going around, and you felt that you were part of it. You felt that you were there.
When I took over in 1977, we also had a middle of the backstretch guy. And when the laps were now sub 1 minute, and so that guy had maybe 4 seconds of narration if we did a whole lap with all the announcers. So we eliminated that after a couple of years. Faster the race gets, the more difficult it began to cover on radio.
I listened to it, I might say, in the Republic of Vietnam in 1968 because it was on all the armed forces networks. So for one brief moment in 13 lousy months, the other
thing that was really significant, I think, to all of us who did it and the guys who do it now, Mark Janes, who's the voice of the 500 and his crew, is that it is a one-day event. It is an incredibly historic, traditional event. And you can't really make a mistake because there's no way you can recover from that mistake. So you have to be very, very precise about what you're doing and really think through what you're about to say. And of course, you're also talking drivers and teams who live off their sponsors, and they have to be presented in a way. You're not saying things that are not true, but you have to try to help them along a little bit and make them the gladiators of the day too, and build them up.
So you couldn't rehearse this, right?
No rehearsal.
So was there any rehearsing at all before a broadcast?
No, we got on, and by the way, one of our pit reporters, Sally Larvick, who happens to really be Sally Page, is here with us, and it was the first woman ever on the radio network. No, we rehearsed it about 15 minutes before we went on the air by saying, "Are you out there? You know, howdy Bell, can you hear me?" And then when the first year I did it, when we came on the air, this is 1977. You've got an AJ Foyt number 14 up there that won in '77, his fourth win. But the first year I did it, just before we went on the air, we were in the 60-second countdown, and Jack Morrow was our producer. And I think he sensed that I was a little apprehensive, a little bit of stage fright going on there. So he leaned over and he took my hand and he shook it, and Freddie Agavation's standing right here watching, and he said it, "Paul, there are 13 million people out there. Don't screw this up." But that was enough to just turn it loose.
So, did you all worry when television began to figure out how to do things? Was it a concern, or did you just switch sides and go to television? Or a little of both?
You mean when we went live? Yeah, because
Yep.
was a tape delay for
Yep.
so many years. I think the Speedway, you might be able to speak to this even better, was more apprehensive about it than the television networks thought they ought to be. And it, for television too, was such an immense challenge. Do you?
Yeah, when you look at, obviously the first tape delay broadcast was snippets on Wide World of Sports, and then in '71 it was a condensed version of the presentation. And it typically, if you weren't in Indianapolis, it would air later that evening at some point. So that obviously posed some challenges, say come '81 and things like that. But it really wasn't until 1986 that they broadcast it live everywhere except Indianapolis. And you guys had a hell of a fight. Obviously, weather didn't put up with you guys, and would have to go back and back and back.
86 was horrible.
Yeah, so it wasn't the greatest debut from a live TV broadcast, but you know, the Speedway is interesting. Obviously, there's still a blackout that they do today from TV locally. You guys are fortunate enough to see it live if you're not making the trek or the pilgrimage up to the Motor Speedway. But there is something to say about the call on radio. And when you're in Indianapolis or Indiana, there's still people that prefer to watch it if they're not in their seats race day, listen to it on radio first, and then watch the tape delayed rebroadcast in flag to flag come 7 or 8 o'clock. So in some cases they're not really watching the Coke 600, which I don't think NASCAR really likes, but they'll almost watch it 3 times in a day, if you will. So.
You know, and Formula One has given us a break now. They just announced that they, starting with 2026, no longer race Monte Carlo on the Memorial Day weekend to give both their fans and their drivers an opportunity to participate in the Indy 500. So that's a big move as well. The fun thing coming to television the first 2 years, I don't think anybody had any idea what they were doing. And you had Sam Posey and Bobby Unser finally, and I inherited those two. And one time Jack Arute, whose picture is there, brought me a referee shirt to wear in the booth, because Sam would say A, and Bobby on this side would say, "Sam, you're absolutely wrong." And then Bobby would begin to talk, and he would finally talk his way around to saying exactly what Sam said, but now Bobby Unser had said it, and therefore it is the truth and correct. But watching that little dance happen was, only once did Sam catch Bobby, but every time else, Bobby just lorded right over the poor man.
You mentioned Formula One, and I was going to talk about it at the end, but since you brought it up, I personally think that watching the Indy 500 compared to watching a lot of Formula One races is much more exciting. We have an American
That's
interest
we're
now.
actually racing.
They're passing one another. And so what's interesting to me now is that Formula One has enjoyed this resurgence. Maybe it's because of video games. I don't know exactly why, but I think that Indy can more than hold its own. What do you think?
Oh, without question. And you talk to the real champions of Formula One, and almost all of them will say, my portfolio as a great champion will not be complete unless I won the Indianapolis 500. So you go Clark and Hill and that long list of foreign drivers that came to the United States, and several for just completely forgetting about Formula One to participate the entire month.
Well, and most of them came in that interesting period when the roadsters were phasing out and the mid-engine cars were coming in. And there was a big dichotomy, I think, between the drivers on one side and the other. Thoughts?
Well, when the rear engine car first came in, everybody in the garage area that had a front engine car said that the rear engine cars were for men that like to be pushed around. But then they found out that the whole design, center of gravity, engine putting weight on the rear wheels made a lot of sense. And so they started copying them, except for the fact that they didn't really know enough about them to know how to set them up, how to bump steer the car. So for some time they weren't any good, 2 or 3 years, and then finally they all figured out how to make the rear engine car work. And look at them now, little jet rockets going down that straightaway.
Well, when you say that, I think of the race with Parnelli Jones and Jim Clark, I think I was one of several people, perhaps millions, watching TV thinking, this can't be happening, but Parnelli held him off, maybe with a little help from J.C. Agajanian. You were there.
And the officials in one case.
Yeah. So that, was that kind of the last gasp of the Roadsters, really?
I think so, don't you?
Yeah, so 1963 was the year Parnelli kind of held off Clark with help of a leaky external oil tank. But the following year, the front row was front engine cars with Clark in the Lotus 34, and then unfortunately there was a bad choice of tires for Clark, which ended his race. And then Parnelli and AJ battled in 2 Watson Roadsters, and then Parnelli had his fire issue, and really, in hindsight, you can look back and see the writing was on the wall, because more and more people, whether it be Mickey Thompson, was switching over, and even Foyt and Parnelli had rear engine options that they could jump in during the month of May, but chose to go with the Roadsters. So that is one of the cars that we have in the collection, which is preserved because it stopped racing in '64, and Foyt jumped into a Lotus 34 starting in '65.
So one of the things I've always liked about Indy, are some of the traditions that are perhaps bizarre in some ways and perhaps make sense in others. Paul alluded to one of them. I mean, for years, women were not allowed in the pits. I'm not sure why, but pioneers like Sally there were some of the women in the beginning who were smart enough, professional enough, respected enough, so that they were allowed. Why did they not let women in the first place?
Oh, that's his. If he can explain it, I want to hear it.
So we're a separate entity from IMS, but it's interesting. Obviously, if you look at the history of professional sports and kind of going back to the Roadster in a way, Indianapolis was kind of a boys' club for the longest time, whether it be from ideas, from traditions and things like that. Obviously, the late 60s and early 70s, there was a huge movement with participation from women, not only in professional standpoint, but also later on with the addition of Janet Guthrie qualifying for the 500 in 1977. They literally, when she did qualify, had to pretty much chalk out a bathroom for her because there was no women's bathroom in Gasoline Alley at the time. So it's you look back at history, and there's obviously parts that are not so fondly looked at. And to your point about the media, it really took a lawsuit for IMS to kind of break that unfortunate precedent that they had. But obviously, sometimes the courts have to intervene in things, and for the better. And that tradition, if you will, was broken, I believe, in '72.
Well, I think I recall with Janet, there were people who did not think she was driver enough to race. And one of the people who helped her and supported her was A.J. Foyt, part of the old guard, who said, put her in my car and let's see what she can do, and she did.
And Bobby Unser loaned her a driver's suit.
Yeah, so, right, 'cause her luggage was lost, and Bobby had to loan her a suit. So there were certainly people there who acknowledged it.
I know you guys had a Women in Motorsports exhibition earlier that we participated with a couple cars, and Janet's 78 car that we had in here, I had a chance to see it during the NAMM conference, and that was her second year making the race. She finished 9th, which was the highest finish for a female driver until Danica Patrick in 05. But you know, she, leading up to the race, suffered a fracture in her hand playing tennis, and she had to hide it from the USAC officials because that was going to be another reason to pull her out of that car. So she pretty much drove that Wildcat really one-handed throughout the race to shift and then obviously get back on the wheel. So to finish in the top 10 was a precedent even today, let alone with a hit and injury.
So thinking about some of the odd traditions, perhaps, if you watch the Indy 500, the winner will roll into the winner's circle. Now they're elevated up into the winner's circle, and out comes a bottle of milk. So what's that about?
Well, in '36, Louis Meyer won the 500. It was his third win. And when he pulled into the winner's circle, which was then more of a square down at the pit exit and surrounded by fencing, he asked for a bottle of cold buttermilk because it was so hot and he was so thirsty. That, like so many things at Indy, became a tradition. He started several. He got the first pace car, and he was the first face on the Borg Warner trophies. So that's those traditions started, and now every fan, you're talking about fans coming in earlier, every fan has a tradition of some sort. I will hear person after person say, well, first I go over here and I touch that wall, or, you know, something like that. And that's part of also, I mean, we're talking the world's largest single-day sporting event, a globally known and understood event. And so it's so important to the fans as well.
Well, two other traditions. One would be Carb Day, short for Carburation Day. It's been a long time since these cars had carburetors, but they still have Carb Day, right?
Bill Vukovich brought in fuel injection, and everybody kind of thought, that's a little better. So,
But they, like so many things, they haven't basically changed the name of the day before when they worked the
They never
last
changed
bugs
it, no.
out of
You're not going to
everything.
change it, are you?
I don't think so. You know, it's now carb typically stands for beer. The carbs from beer because
Right.
it is a big party day. I don't know how many people know it's carburation, but you know, it's pretty amazing because it's really all month of May is a whirlwind, if you will. People showing up and watching the cars practice during the month of May, and qualifying gets bigger and the place comes alive, and that Friday of Carb Day is the second biggest day of the month. And just to see the amount of people, and now they have concerts and things like that over the last 20 years, it really, for at least Indianapolis and Indiana, it's the start of the summer, I would say, and it's a big just tailgate. It's I know tailgates here in the South get a little rowdy too, but it's similar to that atmosphere.
So when I look at those pictures, one of the things that strikes me is how different the early cars were. I mean, a Miller was not at all like a Duesenberg, very different engines. Cars had different suspensions. They were shaped differently. A Watson car was unmistakable. Have we lost that with today's cars sharing like maybe two different engines, and fundamentally a lot of the cars today are the same as one another? What have we lost?
You know, you have that. There is the argument for that. Obviously, with technology and computers, technology changes. And in some cases, it's the minute detail, especially with dampers and things like that with the modern cars that you can't see really separates. It also allows for somewhat of a closer race. You know, you would have people, whether it be Vukovich, you know, leading the field by a lap or two for most of the race. So it's made the on-track action closer and even more, not difficult, but in its own right. But, you know, it is to look back and see, even back then, the cars were different, but chief mechanics or crews would see things happening. So then you would start seeing, okay, a Curtis eventually led to a Watson, and then you would have Travis's, and when the Blue Crowns were running, things started looking like the Dietz. And so cars, yes, they had their differences compared to what they are today, but there was always this kind of development and in some cases copying that you would see in the paddock.
I wanted to ask both of you, and maybe start with Paul, favorite moments, things that happen that you'll never forget. Hopefully on the good side, but perhaps not.
Well, if I can be so bold as to share a couple. One was the first year that I went there was in 1960, which is where that book starts. I didn't want to go. I was a military brat, and we had just come home from Germany. And my parents said, well, your uncle in Indianapolis, we were up in Fort Sheridan, Illinois, wants you to come down and see the 500. And I said, absolutely not. I don't want to see a guy who's turned 800 left turns out there. I have no interest. You're going. I understood that part. And when I got there, again with my uncle, they had a couple of seats up in Grandstand B, which is a beautiful place to be. And at that time, the then Victory Lane was virtually across from there. But I have to tell you, even before the race began, just the ceremonies and the idea of a crowd that big going completely silent for taps, and that just, before the race started, I had to come back there. And then the race was Rathman and Ward, so it was a super race. There is one other. A.J. Foyt, my first broadcast and his fourth win, and then the victory lane was right up in front of the tower, and he got up on the back of his car. And by the way, I was looking down, and there was a guy with several microphones in his hands, and leaning into A.J. to get to, but he was turning up toward the booth, and that's when I realized those microphones aren't plugged into anything. But so he conned his way into big, and for years
He was a crasher.
yeah. But A.J. then he pulled off his leather gloves, which were highly illegal, and he wadded them up, and my booth was 5 stories above that, and he threw them. And I thought, oh my God, A.J.'s recognizing me on this significant moment. And I thought, isn't that? Then I realized the Queen and the Princess Court of the 500 Festival was actually just below me. So he was looking at the girls, not at me.
So AJ, from a legendary point, didn't have a lot of tolerance for reporters. How did you get around that? Because you became friends.
I'm scared of him to this day. I think the only guy that really got in very tight with AJ was Robin Miller, the great writer. I can talk to him, but for some reason I can't get him off of the hero status in my mind, and so I'm always apprehensive when I go talk to him. He's always kind and helpful, but I have been told that with reporters he was very handy with a wrench, and so if you didn't duck fast enough, you didn't want to go in that garage.
Jason, first impressions and favorite moments?
Yeah, so my first race was 2001, which was Elio's first, which is obviously historic for a variety of different reasons. But, I remember passing the track growing up, and 16th Street runs on the south end of the speedway, and you see the back of the grandstands, and it's really 1 and 2. But when you're really young, you think that's a straightaway. You don't even know. Growing up, I didn't even know it went another 5/8 or a mile when it's all said and done north of where I was. So growing up in Indianapolis, obviously the month of May is special, and you learn about it in school, and I would watch it. I grew up around hot rods and muscle cars from my father and grandfather, but just never had the opportunity to go until 01. So I get that chance to go, and we sit in turn 1. To Paul's point, even as I think I was 10-year-old, you could feel that gravity of the moment, whether it be the taps or singing a Back Home Again in Indiana, which that was my kind of thing that I was waiting for because we learned the lyrics in school and stuff like that.
So you could sing along.
Yeah. So, and then seeing all 33 cars go in turn 1, which is unique to the Speedway. But so that I think about that a lot, and like a lot of people still have my ticket from that race and all the other stuff, and it rained a little bit leading up to it, but then fast forward, and I'm fortunate enough to be in my position that I am now and have an opportunity to talk to Paul and Ken and some of the drivers and things like that. But coming out of 2021 to see Elio win a 4th time, and even though it was a smaller crowd because of the situation at the time, I've never seen a crowd just go so haywire to see a four-time winner. That was 30 years, almost to the day, since Rick Mears did it. And Elio, being as exuberant as he was running up and down and I feel bad for, the NBC guys or the radio broadcast, because they're trying to get him physically somewhere to get back in victory lane. He climbed the fence and all the other stuff and ran around. And I think on Peacock you can't even watch the very end because they finally had to cut it off on the stream. So, yeah, it's just. But you have 350,000 plus people having those kind of memories. That's what makes the place special in its own right.
So the race today is a lot safer. That's one of many things that have changed over the years. Can we talk a little about how that came about and why is the race safer today? Well, these guys are going 220 miles an hour in cars that are kind of spindly, but somehow there have been changes made that have made a big difference. How did that start and what's it about?
Well, from my point of view, they have always worried about safety. Just the materials and the technology kept getting better. Louis Meyer, the first three-time winner, and I were friends, and he was in the hospital once, and I was visiting him, and he said to me, he said, "Did you know that the safety belt, seat belt, was created at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway?" And I said, "No, Louis, I've never heard that. I've heard the rear view mirror and other things." Not that. He says, "Well, we used it differently. In the two-man cars, we'd tie the mechanic in to make sure he didn't jump out on a pit stop. So that wasn't really a safety item." But yeah, I think especially after the big accident and the fires in the early 60s, 64 especially, everybody started taking it much more seriously and looking for ways. I mean, originally making the bolts used in the suspensions softer the further out they were, so that if you hit the wall, the wheels could collapse in. And then, of course, the wheels became a problem coming off and flying, and they put tethers on them. And just every time they see something, they're constantly on it. And it finally came to this really sleek-looking little car with the Lexan screen in front of them. It looks like a jet fighter in the cockpit. My only complaint is, in the Watson Roadster upstairs, you could see him fighting that wheel. And in today's cars, you may see a helmet, but you still know that's a human being in there making magic.
Even the wall is higher than
Yeah, well,
than it was,
is it really?
Right?
I thought it was me. I thought I was just getting older. You?
Yeah, I mean, safety has been paramount. You look at 1935 when they implemented helmets. Obviously, they were kind of fiberglass, hard shell helmets, and saved a lot of drivers. We were talking earlier at lunch today about Rudolph Caracciola. It really saved his life in that when he was here in '46. But Tony Holman was very, in the legacy after him, he was very adamant on safety. In 1948, they built the first infield hospital. Dr. Thomas Hanna was the medical doctor. The track had a full-time medical doctor that not only was there when there was an incident, but he also went through physicals, if you will, of the drivers to make sure that they were there and fit to get in the car. You hear stories of Formula One in the 1960s and 70s and even the 80s. I know Jackie Stewart has a story, I think it's Spa, that he had a really bad accident, and eventually, luckily, a medical official showed up to the scene, minutes later, and it was the local gynecologist that just liked to run racing. So a lot of to your point about Formula One drivers, a lot of them were shocked to see the medical and the safety features that were put into the cars. And to your point, the technology really allowed us, whether it be the safer barrier, the construction of the cars, to make this as safe as it can be. But it's still, man and women are not made to run 230 miles an hour. They're not even made to go 20 miles an hour, really. So it's still a dangerous thing. And anytime a driver steps into these cars, no matter what the safety factors, there is that danger. And sometimes you can kind of be lulled into a sense of safety. But when they go into turn one at inches apart at 230 miles an hour, they are risking their life for glory and entertainment.
Yeah, it's interesting to note that someone commented, it might have been Paul, that in terms of safety, they brought the hospital to the drivers instead of bringing the drivers to to the hospital.
They even have now the medical team in the entire electronics package has G sensors in the earphones in their helmets. And should they be an impact, that will record what the G-force was. And if the G-force was significant, then a red light would come on behind the dash, behind the steering wheel. So when the rescuers got there, they knew immediately that that was more than just your average problem and to pay more attention to it. Yeah.
So in contrast, if those of you have read some of the wonderful old books about Indianapolis, one of them is Pete DiPaolo's book, which is called Wall Smacker. It was written right after he won. He was the first 100-mile-an-hour winner in 1925. And he talked about his approach to accidents. And he said, I just head for the basement. What did that mean, one wonders. It meant that he would try to go under the steering wheel and dive down under the cowl. And then whatever happened to the car, well, he'd
Look
be...
at the National, they did have room to do
Yeah,
that.
he'd be a passenger. So, I mean, we've come a long way since drivers headed for the basement, truly. We talked briefly in the beginning about how the Indy 500 Museum is going through a major resurgence. Jason, would you tell us a little bit about that and what you guys are doing?
Yeah, so we're going through, we've been closed really for a week ago, it was a year. We closed to the public, removed all the items, artifacts, vehicles for this renovation. We are currently going through a $64 million total renovation of the facility. So if you go back to the Speedway or never been to the Speedway before, the facade will look the same. The building that was built in 1976 that many of you have gone through will still be the same, that iconic view if you go under the tunnel. But the inside will be completely revolutionized. You know, we were fortunate to go to a lot of different museums, whether it be automotive museum or non-automotive museum, and Savoy being one of them. You guys really have a great crown jewel here from a museum standpoint. So taking pieces, ideas, thoughts, seeing how presentations are. And it's going, I think the biggest thing, not only are we going to be able to display a lot more items and vehicles in a better condition than what we did before, safer condition, we're going to tell the story of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in a way that you haven't seen before, and really mold displays with vehicles and items with experiences, whether it be the starting line experience or more hands-on learning. We're adding an innovation workshop, a STEAM workshop, and then also the qualifying zone, which will have things like simulators, pit stop challenge, engineering challenge, that kids from all ages, young and old, can either attempt to qualify for the 500 or try their hand at a pit stop. So we're looking forward to opening that in April.
I think it's very exciting that while we think of museums a little in the static sense, you're bringing in some kinetics, dynamics, the kind of exciting elements that are really state of the art. So we think that's pretty exciting. Now, Bruce just whispered something to me that I only half heard about a video.
Yeah, we got a video
that they want to show.
Yeah. So this is the kind of fly-through of the museum. So that, like I mentioned, the front of the museum will stay the same. We did some minor renovations to that building itself. So when you walk in, you're going to walk into a rotunda, more welcoming than what you saw in the past. Right when you walk in, you take a left here, you go into the Welcome Center. This is where you get your ticket. A couple items that are in this location, we will have a car that is on display, so we'll rotate a vehicle, similar to how you walk into here and are greeted with cars. This is a digital pin map. We have a lot of international and interstate guests that come to the Speedway, so you'll be able to put your location in there and see the visitor. You'll go through a donor wall here. This is a publicly supported campaign that we are fundraising for to get us to that $64 million renovation, so we're on the home stretch there. This is your first experience. This is Gasoline Alley. So you'll have 7 garages with corresponding display cases on your right and left. So these garages, you'll walk through the history of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway through the lens of the garages. So these will be dressed up as in period. Obviously, we'll rotate the vehicles going through here. Another notion, even the ground will change. When you walk in, there will be a simulation of crushed rock and tar, the original surface of the speedway, through a brick facade surface and then to an asphalt. So you'll feel how it felt to be on the track of those different eras. Obviously, stopping at the final garage is the new concrete. So those iconic wooden green and white garages to the modern concrete. I mentioned the race in the race day morning presentation. This in front of you, this is a 20-foot wide by 80-foot long LED screen that will go in front of you and then above you. So this will be a presentation that really encapsulates what it feels like to be at the Speedway during race morning. So we'll talk about the bomb going off at 5 a.m., through all the pageantries, as we mentioned, taps, singing it back home again, Indiana, and that presentation will end with the cars taking the green and going into turn one. Those will be show cars that will wrap with the current front row of the 500. We have a couple. This is our winners area here. We will display the 34 plus winning cars that you guys have a subset of in the museum in 2 different levels. So we'll have them on individual platforms that flank the Borg Warner Trophy, but then we'll also have them in these display case wall displays. These are actual cars that will be at a 45-degree bank on display inside the walls here. Everything across the board will be well lit. The Borg Warner will have its own prominent display in the middle with artifacts and a digital touchscreen monitor, so you can learn more about the faces, the now 109 faces that are on the Borg Warner Trophy. Another thing that we're doing is, this is the atrium. We capped the skylight because that wasn't great for the artifacts. This all right here, this is the mezzanine. This is new construction inside. We've added 6,000 square feet of new display area to the ceiling, if you will, of the museum. So we can get a vehicle up here, but this will really be artifact driven, telling the stories of the other races that are held here. The ownership groups will have an art area that we can display the art. We'll have some digital monitors that will talk about the IMS Hall of Fame, which Paul's a part of, all 805 drivers that have run the Indianapolis 500, a timeline, things like that, mixing both the digital and physical artifacts story. We are separate from IMS and Roger Penske, but we will have a Penske gallery. Obviously, Roger now is a 20-time Indianapolis 500 winner. He also, since 2020, has owned the track. So we have worked with him to bring parts of his collection into the museum. This is the qualifying zone that I mentioned. A couple features of this. We'll have what we're calling a dissected car. This is a current NTT IndyCar Series car that will be blown apart, showing all the internals, all the technology that you see in the cars today. We'll have a steering challenge so you can steer and feel what the drivers feel trying to turn the car with no power steering. Simulators, so you'll have your chance to try to qualify for the 500 with a leaderboard. I mentioned the pit stop challenge, and then we'll also have a real feel area for the pit crews so you could see what a tire feels like, the wheel gun. You could try to fuel the car, things like that. And then we have a young area for younger kids, soft play. This is our innovation workshop. This is that STEAM classroom that we talked about. We just hired a director of education who's leading the initiative to not only add more educational components to our museum, but also increase field trips to make younger fans of the NTT IndyCar Series and the 500. Something that wasn't open in the past was the basement. It was off limits, except if you were VIPs or exclusive tour. So this is open to the public. We punched a hole down to the floor with the staircase. We will have in this section right here additional winning 500 cars on a banked platform and individual platforms. So we'll have 12 cars in this location. We'll have a feature car gallery once we turn the corner here that we went through initially. The feature car gallery is a rotating exhibition area. So we'll have 8 platforms that we can display in this location here, other cars. So we're actually opening with a Brickyard 400 winning car exhibition when we open in May or April. This is our temporary exhibition. This is 4,800 square feet of display space so we can rotate different exhibitions. We're opening with a 4-time winners exhibition. So Foy, Unser, Mears, and Castroneves will be honored in this location when we reopen. Another thing that we're doing is we're incorporating the tours. On days that there's no racing happening at the Speedway, we do offer tours around the track on the buses, so that's going to be better incorporated into your experience. You'll actually board the track here. This is a projection map track, so it will be a white model on the top, but there'll be LED projectors that will show the track transform in front of you from farmland in 1909 into today. We'll have an area that you can sit in a current car. And finally, this is the In the Race experience. This is a corridor that will have 2 projectors on either side that show what it feels like to be here race day. So we'll have exciting on-track atmosphere. So when there's nothing going on at the Speedway from a race standpoint, people will see what it feels like to be here at the Speedway. So
How about it? I mean, is that incredible? You know, people tell you that they're going to make a few changes and they show you a few pictures. What we just saw is the future, and we saw it in a way that has really brought it to life. So
thank you.
We're very excited about that.
Yeah, we're excited to open in April, and obviously, as I mentioned, we're still fundraising for that. But then another phase 2, if you will, is a 60,000 square foot restoration and storage location that will be open to the public. That will trail behind the opening of the museum. But our goal with that is to have it open to the public so people can see the cars being worked on with our 6 full-time staff restoration team. And also, if there's not a car in the museum that it's on display when you're there, you'd be able to go to the storage location and see the cars when they're in open storage. So that's in the future, near future, but we're really looking forward to that opening in April.
So are we. So, Paul, before we turn it over to questions, it's a thrill for you, this race, and it has been for years. Has it ever lost its luster? You still look forward to it every year with this same excitement?
The hair on the back of my neck still bristles a little when I walk through the gate on race morning. No, I've never lost. One of the great people at the Speedway who works with Jason, Peggy Swalls, who has been there almost as long as I have, or I think more, she said it the other day at lunch. She said, it's not a job, it's a passion, and that's exactly what it is. That's the way I always looked at it, and it's so very, very special. It's almost impossible to describe how important it is.
So speaking of great people, Donald Davidson was always a hero of mine. For those of you who don't know, Donald was an Englishman who came to the United States and worked for years. He's now retired, but he was encyclopedic, right? I mean, and you remember him. And some thoughts on a man who seemed to have all the Indy stats in his head?
Well, yes. Sid brought him over in 1963. And just as a guest, he was being nice, and then he realized talking to him how much Donald knew. And more importantly, Donald knew the facts, but could make them come alive for you with his stories.
Yeah, it's amazing to think. I'm very privileged to have worked with Donald and still talk to him from time to time. He is enjoying retirement, which rightfully so. But, you know, for him, not only did he know it, he met a lot of these drivers. He talked to Ray Haroon. He went to his place in Anderson and you know, was there with him. You know, for someone with a background that you would never suspect, being from England, learning about the Speedway, making it over here, you know, making the decision to make this his career, his time with USAC, he is someone that is pivotal to the legacy of the 500. Mm-hmm. And you know, I'm very fortunate I had those 6 or 7 years plus that I was able to work alongside him.
He was great to work with in the booth, by the way, because he was on the radio network with him. And the only problem was, and I always worried about Donald. He's always very kind about it, but his stories are so long. Even when he's in the race and talking about something, he'd raise his hand down at the end, and I think, geez, do I have 3 minutes? Can I? But it was worth every minute of it. I mean, anytime you went to him, he had something just truly special, a unique view.
Mm-hmm. So I think we have a few minutes for questions.
Yep. If you will, wait till we get the microphone to you so that we can get it. We are recording.
You mentioned that the museum is a separate entity from the Speedway. I'm interested in knowing a little bit more about that. So who owns the museum?
Yeah, so the museum is owned by a 501c3 public institution. When Tony Holman started the museum in 1956, it was, from that point, a separate entity. In early 2000s, we went from a private to a public foundation. So then that's when we truly separated from the Speedway. So we work, obviously, a great partnership with IMS, with Roger. During that transition, the museum kind of stayed the same from an organizational standpoint. We own over 150 vehicles, 55,000 pieces of non-vehicle artifacts, so ranging from documents all the way up to suits and trophies and things like that. But yeah, it's a unique because we are settled in there. You know, there's the kind of a notion that we are part of IMS, or we are you know, owned by Penske or something like that, which we are our own separate entity.
First, thank you for your participation tonight and all this great education. I'm always interested when there's a museum involved, the mechanics of your acquisition efforts. And are there certain things out there that are floating around? Of course, this is the jewel in the crown up here, number 32, but are there things that you would really like to have that may or may not be available?
Yeah. I mean, that's with any museum. I think you have that, and the museum is setting itself up in multiple different ways. Not only what I showed you in this presentation for the future, to continue to tell those stories of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. We have been through Bring a Trailer. We went through a deaccession project, and obviously we're finishing that up with the announcement of an 11 car sale from RM. That money that is raised by the deaccession and sale of vehicles cannot go to this construction. It has to be based on kind of fine auditing and best practices. It has to go to the either care of the collection or acquisition. So we are setting ourselves up to build an acquisition budget, to build a endowment that then will care for the vehicles and non-vehicles. So what we're doing is we constantly, museums across the board do this, reevaluate our collection, make sure that we have artifacts, not only vehicles, but they're kind of the high cost item, that tell the story, support our mission. So by selling some vehicles that were outside, great objects, great vehicles, but outside our core scope, will set us up for the future. So I would see us in the future really being able, in a way that we weren't in the past, to acquire objects and vehicles that we may have gaps in our storytelling. And collecting in the day for museums is always difficult too. So, you know, it's a lot easier now to start stocking up on, say, Scott Dixon items than 30 years down the road. So I think we're setting ourselves up in the future, but like any museum, there's economics a part of it too.
And before we get to our next question, I think this is a great opportunity to let folks know, if you don't know, with this exhibition, of course, we started with 2 cars from your collection in our Women in Motorsports, which you acknowledged. We did the first part of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway exhibition, and then this car is currently on exhibit at the Henry Ford, and it is scheduled to arrive here at Savoy Monday, Tuesday next week, Bruce? I know.
It's in
so
transit.
Soon, I'll leave it that way. Soon, as part of the Part 2 exhibition with the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum and Jason and their collection here at Savoy, the first winner, the 1911 Marmon Wasp, will be here at Savoy as part of our current exhibit. So I thought that was a great opportunity to share that news before we get to our next question.
I grew up in Speedway and really enjoyed it and always loved listening to you and watching and that. But back in 1981, I was 19 years old. That race, Bobby Unser, Mario Andretti, and then it went on for I don't know how long. And I'm just wondering your perspective and any insight and what happened and then what happened afterwards so that would never happen again.
I'll give you my view of it. There are others may look at it differently, but that was when ABC was delayed into the evening. And during the edit, they saw something that they thought was illegal, and that was Bobby Unser coming out and passing the field as the field came through turn one, so he gained the entire field. So they took that over to the officials. And Tom Binford, the chief steward, looked at it, decided it was a serious violation, and took the win away from Bobby. In fact, I knew nothing about it. When I was done, I'm totally exhausted at the end of the day. I went home, but I always drive out the next morning to see the photograph session with the new winner. And the marquee up in front of the Speedway Motel said, "Congratulations, Mario Andretti." The hell? So that went on for a long time. I was one of two reporters that got to sit through the entire thing, and watching Bobby Unser testify alone, that's a feature-length movie right there. But it eventually worked out that Bobby did win the race. Mario still has the winner's ring, but it was really, from my view, I don't think the officials would have caught that on their own, because it's a violation that at that time you had to see it from several different locations to verify it. There's a blend line now that is absolute, but I truly believe that would not have been called had ABC not come over with the video. And Bobby and I sat weeks at a time looking at every piece of videotape we could find to try to prove different. And what we found out was not only Bobby did it, everybody did it, so, and including Mario. But that was not a fun time. And when I came out, when they were making the announcement, I came out, and one of Roger Penske's PR types, who happened to be a lawyer, had a press release, and the press release says, "We will continue to appeal this." And I said to the guy, I said, "Put it away. You won the thing." "No, get that out. I'd love to. If I'd only grabbed one then, because I like to collect strange things like that. If I'd only grabbed that release, it would have been great."
So a quick note on the car here, and Tom, thank you for making the announcement. This kind of controversy started really in the first year. People remember the Marmon Wasp because Ray Haroon carefully calculated how fast he'd have to drive, and regardless of what was going on around him, he felt his average speed would win, and he was right. And of course, he was the first person to use a rear view mirror at the Speedway. But to this day, there are people, mainly in the Mulford family, who think that Smilin' Ralph won the race. Somewhere along the line, timing sheets were lost, there was a mix-up, and there are still people who argue over who won the first race. So
there's a pretty good argument for that. As a matter of fact, at ABC, I once said, there are a number of finishes that really probably could have gone in either way and had some controversy about them. I said, we ought to do a feature on those. Absolutely not. You're not. That's a very important property for us, and it's either you or them. I said, no, I'll stay.
Yeah, I think it's before we closed, we had an exhibition that honored the drivers to finish second, runner-up, and never win. There's a lot of drivers who have finished second in their career that would go on to win and things like that. But we wanted to honor it was 43 drivers that were so close to that immortality, and obviously Ralph was one of those. And I think it is kind of that more folklore that has gained traction over the years than at the time. But yes, there was a little bit of controversy, and multiple days after the facts, they're reviewing timing and scoring records, and then Fisher burned them afterwards to try to set the record straight. But reading the in report day reports, and it really comes down to tires. To your point, it's a strong argument that we are right that Haroon in that car was the first winner of the 500.
And for those of you who are book collectors on this subject, there's actually a book about drivers that finished second, so you can look for that. I think we've got someone right here.
Yeah, speaking of 1966 was another year when Graham Hill won the race, and Colin Chapman thought that Jim Clark had won the race, and I'm not sure either side is really convinced what was right, but Graham Hill went down as the winner. The one time I attended the race was in 2013, and the thing that startled me when it was all over, that was the fastest 500 to that point, and the race began at 12:10, and when Tony Kanaan crossed the finish line to win, I looked at my watch and I was aghast to see that it was only 2:45 in the afternoon, and I was staying outside of town, and I had planned to have dinner in Indianapolis before I went back to my hotel. But what am I going to do at 2:45? So I went to the museum and spent a couple of hours there. I hadn't been there since 1995, I think. But the thing that bugged me was how close together the cars were, which made it very difficult to photograph. And looking at your presentation, it's hard to believe it's the same building.
Walking through it, it's hard to believe it's the same building. But yeah, that we had kind of a mentality at that time to show everything, or everything that we could in that square footage. So yeah, they were wheel to wheel, and we've heard a lot of fans, a lot of guests that want to appreciate the cars, and I think something that the folks here at Savoy do well is their presentation and seeing the cars. Paul actually mentioned before, he asked if this was the most winners that we've displayed in one area, and I reminded him, no, we had 34. But it's that, to your point, when they're wheel to wheel, you can't appreciate. You kind of go, it fogs up. You may see something on this vehicle because it's here and you can walk around it or you can see it that catch your eye. But when it's wheel to wheel to wheel, that stuff is lost. So that's what we're excited when we reopen, to really appreciate the vehicles and the non-vehicle artifacts that are on display.
Because most of the great museums in the country have to be selective in what they show.
Yep.
I've been to the Barber Museum, as huge
Yep.
as that place is. George Barber has a lot more motorcycles than what are on display. And the LeMay Museum in Tacoma does the same thing. Every time, I've been there 3 times, and every time I see different cars, because they have to rotate, and obviously Savoy is doing some of that as well. But I want to ask, the first time I visited was back in '79. At the time, they offered, at the time it was $1, a bus tour of the track. And the other thing that I found interesting is that there was a Miss Budweiser hydroplane on display. And while it was impressive to see, I said, what the heck is that doing here? So I assume that you've gotten rid of anything that doesn't really apply to the 500. And are you still offering something akin to a bus tour?
Yeah, so we still are, and we're incorporating that into the presentation of the museum in a better way. Most likely, when you took that bus tour, you walked right in the front door, you bought your ticket, and you walked right out the front door to go to the bus. So now guests will have more of an understanding through the museum of the 500 and IMS before they actually go on the tour, if they choose that. Yeah, we had a lot of eclectic. When we started, Tony Holman and the first curator Carl Kaiser, they were building not only the IMS museum, but under the foundation there was another museum in Terre Haute called the Early Wills Museum. So we collected a lot of passenger cars, a lot of kind of unique things like the 196, like the Miss Budweiser hydroplane. That has been part of this kind of selection. We do have some non-Indy 500 vehicles as part of the collection. We have a 30-car Indiana-built automotive collection that we have retained because when the Speedway began, it really was a testing bed for the American automotive industry, but Indiana had over 300 car companies in its day, at its heyday. A lot of those were bankrupt over a few years, and some of the major ones were kind of killed off by the Depression, with Studebaker being the last one. So we wanted to maintain that Indiana auto core, but majority of our collection has ties to the Speedway.
By the way, I want you to say, when I saw the collection of winners up here today, and I've been here before, exactly what Jason echoed what I said then, that this museum respects all of their exhibits. So there's plenty of opportunity to see them. They look so much better when they're set out like they are upstairs, and I really appreciate that out of the Savoy.
Okay, one more.
Jason, on the basement of the museum, I was lucky enough to go take a tour with Bill Sporley and Barney Wimmer years ago.
Yep.
And he was a friend of my father's during the late 40s and 50s. And I was curious, there was a giant painting of my great uncle's 1932 Win down in the basement. Is that still there?
So you're Fred Frame's nephew or great nephew? Okay, yes, we do have that. It's in storage because nothing's in the museum right now. But so yeah, we still have that. With the new configuration of the basement being public area, and how large it is, it's not going to be on display in the museum. But with that restoration building, we have the ability to display those I mean, this thing is every bit of 10-foot wide painting. It's not a small thing. So we are looking for, there's a few of those large. There used to be in the atrium a quite large painting of at the time, the 3-time winners, and then one of Foyt's 77, the car out there, a pit stop. Those are other items that we're looking to figure out once we have the restoration where to properly display those. So maybe a few more years, but we're looking to redisplay that in that location.
Of course, a big donation from the Frame family might go a long way.
Yeah. Well, that's something we're keeping, but obviously the car is here, and I'm glad, not knowing, I'm glad you were able to see it in person.
Jason, Paul, Ken, we got one more right here in the middle.
Jason, this is for you. The Ford Museum has the 65 Jimmy Clark winning car, and you guys have the 65 winning Jimmy Clark car.
We have the 64 pole car.
Is that what you have?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the Lotus 38 that they have. Obviously, when it rolled out of Victory Circle at the time, it was a Ford car. Because Ford was dead set on winning the 500. What we have is the Lotus 34 that Clark showed up in 64, and with the selection of Dunlop tires, chunked the tires and threw the suspension off the car. The car then was sold because Ford really cared, and Lotus cared about the 500, they would sell those cars after the fact to teams. So J.C. Agajanian purchased the car, and then the car ran later that year as the Hearst Floor Shift Special. So it was repainted gold and black with the Hearst livery, and then it actually finished second to Clark in 1965. Okay. So that's the car that we have. They're very similar. If you had them next to each other, it'd be hard to tell the difference. Same livery, but that is the car that we have.
All right, that answers my question. Thank you very much.
All set, Bruce? Yeah. I'd just like to thank you all for your enthusiasm and attendance, and certainly thank Paul and Jason for their insights. Let's all go to that museum when it's open.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
All right. I'd like to thank everybody for coming and hope to see
Wait
you
for a
at the next
photo
one.
too,
I
so.
think December 6th is our next program, so please make sure you come back. Have a great evening.